All right, everyone. There's currently a consideration of judicial precedent with regards to the cases against Donald Trump. Of course, one of them's federal, the others are state. You've got Alvin Bragg's case, that's about business fraud. That's a state case. You've got Jack Smith's case, that's the federal one. That's with the Mar-a-Lago papers. Fulton County, Georgia, where you've got a case involving RICO mainly. And then you've got now the Letitia James. It's more of a civil case. It's about fraud related to the inflation of property values. So you've got four different witch hunts right now against one man, which are totally coincidentally timed to coincide with the Republican primaries, but whatever. I totally believe that. SCOTUS may or may not choose to weigh in on these cases. There's a problem, though. While I support Trump, and while these cases are frivolous, and while they shouldn't exist at all because none of them really have any meaning. For instance, with the Mar-a-Lago documents case, Trump is a former president. He's allowed to take his homework home with him. Declassification is a thing. The case never should have existed in the first place. He had been cooperating with law enforcement, with the FBI, etc., to make sure that the documents that he did take were under lock and key. They were not accessible to the public. The idea that he shared secrets about U.S. nuclear subs that were, by the way, already declassified with random foreign dignitaries or guests at the Mar-a-Lago appears to be spurious. The case shouldn't exist. Bragg's case involves misdemeanors artificially upgraded. Fulton County involves a RICO case that is completely laughable. Letitia James' civil case is even more laughable. At this point, it's really just her own personal, self-professed, very publicly animus against Donald Trump that's even keeping the case going. I don't even see it going anywhere. Honestly, I think that the New York State Attorney General is going to lose in that particular case fairly easily. But, stranger things have happened than the complete upending of the judicial process. We've seen this a number of times with Trump, you understand. SCOTUS may weigh in on this case. Trump's attorneys are pressing the Supreme Court to effectively cock-block all four investigations and say, look, you can't prosecute him. He's a former president. He's covered under immunity from the Nixon era, effectively, so, you can't do anything about this. Here's my worry. If SCOTUS does decide to block these cases, you've made several problems. The first problem is that because Donald Trump has been cast as having stacked the Supreme Court by doing what he's legally entitled to do by filling 3 vacancies on SCOTUS, because of the composition of the court, half the public will not accept that particular verdict. They will say that the Supreme Court is interfering with the election. Likewise, by considering the possibility of making a decision if they choose not to, they'll be considered to have been interfering in the election by the other half of the population. The mere fact that they're saying publicly that they might consider the case at all is effectively a goddamn dead end because, again, a portion of the population ain't going to accept whatever the outcome is. The second problem is more expansive, and it doesn't involve Donald Trump. I see Donald Trump as innocent in these charges. I do not believe he committed business fraud. I do not believe that he was involved with racketeering and trying to overthrow elections. This is a mythology that has been concocted over time by propaganda, mainly by the legacy media and by big tech under coercion from various government bureaucrats that are loyal to the Uniparty. But what if we get a president 20 years from now who has done something absolutely despicable and we find out about it after they've left office? So President Joe Schmo, running in 2032 or whatever, he gets in there, he becomes unpopular, so we kick him out after 1 term, hopefully. And then 5 years later, we find out that he personally oversaw war crimes. What do? You've got a binding Supreme Court decision saying you can't prosecute the bastard. What you've just done is create a legal precedent. Now, SCOTUS can revisit that at a later date and say, well, that prior thing that had to do with these civil cases had to do with fraud and things like that. We're not talking about war crimes. Or Joe Schmo, molested people or did something terrible. He was running a dogfighting ring with the rest of the DNC in the garage of the White House. They can refine things, but they've created a precedent and would have to revisit the case. Otherwise, the precedent will automatically stand at every lower court. It'll be used as a precedent. That could be a big problem because you've effectively handed permanent and total immunity, or at least you could construe it that way, to the head executive. So let's say it's not Trump. He took some classified materials back to the Mar-a-Lago with him. He kept them under lock and key. You've got no proof that he ever discussed them with anyone, let alone showed them classified material. He claims they were declassified. What if you get a future president who's in a wanton manner, simply on the way out in the last week that he's in office or she's in office, grabs a bunch of highly classified military documents, doesn't declassify them, makes no attempt, puts them in a box, and is showing them to the Chinese or something like that? What you've done is created a protective precedent, potentially, depending on how it's interpreted, how it's worded, that can hold up in lower courts, and really it could be a very long process to actually have justice in a case such as that. The problem is the precedent, and this is why the court should be reluctant to weigh in on things in general. Generally is. I don't know that they're going to weigh in on this at all. It's up in the air as to whether they wade into the case. The problem is 1/3 of the justices on the Supreme Court were appointed by Donald Trump. Again, if they decide to side against him, he'll complain, number one. It'll make Trump look weak, potentially, number two. Well, you can't even control your own SCOTUS justices. You're not supposed to, but some partisan hyper MAGA people would blame him for that. Oh man, you should have chosen better. You should have had, three ripoffs of Scalia, basically, instead of this Amy Coney Barrett bullshit and this fucking Kavanaugh. Liberals won't accept it if he's given that immunity. And then you've created that much more broad precedent than you currently have. And I don't know how helpful the entire thing would be. If anything, I would think half the population just gets more socially alienated as a result of any decision whatsoever that you can make in this case. They would have to severely constrain their words and like maybe pick a couple of the cases off and say, okay, the states can't do this. Okay, well, the Mar-a-Lago case continues to go forward. Or the federal government can't do this. That case goes away, the fraud cases continue, or something like that. They'd have to be very limited if they make a decision at all with any hope for recourse in the future. So I don't know how helpful it'd be. Also, it'd be unhelpful for him as well, simply because the public would then assume his guilt. Well, your friends at SCOTUS had to step in to save you because you were so self-evidently guilty. MSNBC told me so. That's not helpful either, just for politically strategic purposes. That's about all. Peace out.